Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's presentation. My name is Allan Donsky, and I'm going to be talking this evening on a topic which is of great interest to me, and that is the topic of impermanence. I'll be chatting for about 50 minutes or perhaps an hour. Some of this will be experiential. And then we'll have ample opportunity for questions, discussion, conversations. As always, we like to start at the Wellness Through Mindfulness group with an activity, with a short practice. And being as it is, I just ask you to make yourselves comfortable. And if you wish to close your eyes, you can. And if you wish to keep them open, you can do that as well. And the practice this evening is going to be centered around noticing impermanence. And so that's the only practice we have during the sit, is to notice the comings and goings of whatever is in your field of awareness. Not really interested in the content of what comes and goes, but rather the comings, the arisings. Things may last a few moments, and then in awareness, they're replaced by something else. Having said that, though, you can be aware that your attention has just shifted to my voice, the contents of my words. And you may want to follow the invitation or the directions I'm going to give you, and just notice how everything shifts. So at the moment you're hearing what I'm saying, and then it shifts into silence. But perhaps there's not absolute silence where you are right now. There may be but the hum of the lights in your room, or passing traffic or activity in some other room in your where you're living in your home. Maybe a rumble of your tummy. So every moment there's a shift in our hearing and our attention of what we're hearing. If your eyes are closed, you may want to open them a couple of times, and suddenly, poof, you can see something in front of you, and close your eyes again, and you're looking at the back of your eyelids. That's impermanent too, your vision. You may shift your attention to any part of the body you wish. You can be micro-focused. Pay attention to a toenail on your left foot. Or you can just observe the body as a whole. And shifting, things come into and out of awareness. You can shift attention to the breath. And the breath is not stationary either. No part of that breath cycle is permanent either. The in-breath, the gap. Out-breath, the gap. Pause, the stop. You can notice the activities of your mind. Thoughts coming and going, analysis, ideas, associations, wishes, memories, wonderings. Thoughts come and go too. The other content of the mind we talk about is emotions or feelings. Those come and go too. And even if you are feeling restless right now, you can notice even the nature of the restlessness might be changing moment to moment. It might be physical, it might be emotional, it might be thoughts. Why can't I settle? You may be feeling calm. And the nature of the calmness changes as well. Its aspects, its flavors, its dimensions. So no matter where you look in what you call your experience right now, none of it lasts. None of it is unchanging. Your skin turns over every 7 or 10 days. New skin cells are made in the dermis of the skin and then the epidermis. Then it flakes off. Every red blood cell, red corpuscle that carries oxygen around your body, we lose about 1% of our blood cells a day. It gets turned over, they get old. And so every 100, 120 days, every red blood cell in your body is recycled. Even things which seem solid, like calcium, phosphorus in your bones, continually being remolded and turned over. So we started this evening just with that lived experience that everything is impermanent. Now, for many of us, that can present a challenge in terms of being a little scary, because we tend to identify ourselves as having a life in some way, but there's actually joys to living this recognition. And so I'm going to start the slideshow. And the joys of impermanence. I want to acknowledge the traditional territories, the people of Treaty 7 in Southern Africa, Southern Alberta. There was an interesting slip. The Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Pikani, Kainai First Nations, Tsutina First Nations, Stoney Nakoda, Shaniki, Bearspaw, Wesley First Nations, and the city of Calgary. And to notice the impermanence of all of this. Buildings come, buildings go. Confederacies come, confederacies go. New treaties are signed, treaties are modified, new people arrive. So even in what we tend to see as fixed, there's change. We've done our practice. This is the territory we're going to explore this evening. We're sort of entering a forest that's relatively unknown here, the impermanent. And we're going to come to some further territory higher up that might have a grander vista. And this is the territory we're going to cover this evening. And let's just start with what you've already experienced, which is the reality that some things we believe are permanent, but in fact, most of life is impermanent. There's both and. About the only thing that I could think of as I was preparing my slides was that your date of birth is fixed. Not much else is fixed. I can change my name legally. If I'm a criminal, I can get a fake alias. I can change my gender. I can get a new passport photograph. I can live in a different country. So there's actually very little in our lives, even our lives that we seem to be living in the world out there. even that, there's not much that's permanent or is not available for change or modification. Let's take a look at the implications of this impermanence, which is you're not what you really think you are. So going back a little bit to René Descartes, 1600s, the mind-body split. He just kind of experienced this mind and body split. And that has caused a great deal of trouble in terms of understanding the reality of our lived lives, because it's more complicated than that. And going back even further, we go to the idea of the Buddha more than 2,500 years ago and spoke about the 5 aggregates. And we actually touched on all of these during the sit. There's awareness of the body, a material. There's a solidity. Yes, if I punch myself in the face, I will go out. There are sensations. These are typically thought of as the 5 senses. And then as soon as we have a sensation, there's a perception. Pleasant, unpleasant, preferred, not preferred. We then have the activities of the mind, thoughts and feelings, and then consciousness or awareness itself. And I'm not going to elaborate on any of this, but all of this is very fluid. All of this is open to change. And to some degree, this is captured in a famous sutra, the Heart Sutra, where they talk about form and emptiness. Emptiness is form and form is emptiness. So at one level, we seem to have a form and we can describe what these aggregates are. But in another sense, there's nothing fixed, permanent, absolute in any of this. So there's emptiness and form, and they have a relation with each other. The 5 aggregates, we tend to see ourselves as a collection. And these 2 pictures, we assemble ourselves or a vision of ourselves. And this looks like it's a person, but if you just turn this photo upside down, it's just a fruit basket. We tend to aggregate and clump ourselves into some kind of identity or a container that we tend to call I, me, and mine. My house, my name, my children, my relationships, my work, my people, my tribe, my beliefs. And we tend to concretize ourselves around this idea of this fixed identity, but it's all up for grabs, truly. And then the cultural iceberg, there's a whole lot of stuff that's often in the background that has influenced the sense of identity. Our family, media. Sorry, I'm wanting to go back here. Family, media, our history, the religion or not we were or weren't raised in, our education, our economics, etc. And so we start to really see that when we try to find this fixed I, me, mine, there's actually a lot of difficulty in sort of nailing it down. There's nothing fixed or permanent. There is an emptiness to it. That does not mean we don't have a body or sensation or perceptions or thoughts or feelings or awarenesses. We do, but all of it is very fluid. When I first saw this picture from the Hubble telescope, and this is in the Crab Nebula, some 4,000 light years away from us, and this was called, this photograph captured what they've called the pillars of creation. And this is an area in this galaxy where there are stars are being born. New, very bright patches of stars are being born inside these pillars. And these are just clouds of dust which condense. And we all know that stars condense, the weight and the gravity, they start reactions, nuclear fusion, they use up the fuel, turn hydrogen to helium, and eventually the fuel wears out, and then this furnace just grows and grows and grows, and these stars explode, and all the gases and everything gets recycled again. And it's interesting that we talk about creation, and we must remember that we are creatures. So we ourselves are created, and we can create. And we have this capacity to keep on creating. And one of the teachings in the Buddhist tradition is that impermanence really tells us that there's no self. And one of the causes of a great deal of suffering in the world is that clinging to this idea of I, me, and mine. So the idea of impermanence and the fact that there's no fixed self can cause a lot of suffering when we want to concretize this and keep everything the same and protect and cling to things and have aversions to things that we don't want. I don't want things to change. Nobody welcomes crisis. Nobody welcomed COVID. Nobody welcomes inflation and all the problems of the world and the eco suffering and all that stuff. And it's because we start to cling to the idea that we want everything to the same. So without accepting impermanence and without accepting that, in fact, everything changes, this can cause a great deal of suffering, and these build on each other. Why don't we like change? What is it? We want things to be nice and quiet and pretty. Well, our usual response is as follows. We don't like uncertainty because we don't feel in control. With uncertainty, we default to assuming bad things will happen. And we don't like feeling vulnerable. Uncertainty leads us to vulnerability. These are sort of three key ideas. And our usual response in red to uncertainty is that we try and fight or flight or freeze. And these are instinctive ideas to try and regain control because we don't like this stuff. We have an aversion to uncertainty, so we try to fight it. But the problem is when we fight or flight or freeze, we actually run away from ourselves. We try and avoid ourselves. But in fact, there's nowhere to go. And when I saw this picture on many of the images are Wikimedia, so they're not copyright protected. They're in the public domain. These two geese, perhaps they're flirting, but perhaps they're fighting. I don't know. It's interesting. But the idea is that they're somehow not avoiding each other. They're in a relationship which can either be fractious and oppositional, or perhaps they're leaning into each other and they're trying to figure out what their relationship's going to be. So what is our relationship going to be to impermanence? Well, why our usual modes don't work is that fight or flight or freeze, we reach a dead end. Because when we try and gain control and run from ourselves, there's actually nowhere to go. There's no geographical fix. And so the question now becomes that can we lean into, and that's what mindfulness is all about, as you've heard many times. It's about leaning into discomfort, uncertainty, impermanence, the sense that we're always dying unto ourselves, and to lean into it rather than run away, because this doesn't work. The running away simply doesn't work. We've all felt lots of this in the last couple of years, the scream, Edward Munch, the vacancy here, the internal turmoil many people are feeling, the anxiety, the nervousness, and the word anger, angst, anxiety and anguish all have the same root word in German, angst. It's interesting that anger and anxiety have the same root, as does anguish, suffering. And this word ennui has come up in the last couple of years, sort of a world weariness. It can be related to depression, but it's not quite depression. There's just a weariness, an emptiness, a nothingness, and it may be related to depression or hopelessness. So this is the reality. This is what many of us are going through. So what do we do? Well, when we're feeling lost and things have fallen apart in the outer world, the world isn't what it looked like a couple of years ago, we're either feeling lost or very lost. But that's the perfect place to start. Because the moment I know that I'm lost, I know exactly where I am. The moment I know I'm lost, I know exactly where I am. And then the journey begins of trying to reorient or recreate. Many of you have seen this acronym previously. RAIN, I believe Tara Brach, teacher in the States, first used it. There are a number of different versions of it, but this is what we did in the sit this evening. All these slides are commentary on what we experienced at the beginning. We recognize what is. We accept it, and acceptance in the sense of seeing it for what it is. Acceptance doesn't mean sucking it up. Acceptance doesn't mean denying it. Acceptance doesn't mean ignoring your feelings. Acceptance doesn't mean putting on a pretty face. Acceptance doesn't mean positive thinking. Acceptance is just not resisting what is. Because we've got to lean into it in order to work with it. Because we can't run from ourselves. Because you can't run from yourself. If running away is not the solution, then obviously it has to be coming into it to be in a more intimate, wise, human, healing, integrated relationship with ourselves. We need to investigate it with the eye. What is this? What's going on? And we need to see what comes up and ask ourselves, what do we need to nurture? And what can come up is anything that's in your life. So this is a framework. We have to let it rain on ourselves. Mindfulness. Mindfulness has two components as I conceptualize it. I can only talk about one thing at a time. This is the process we went through this evening. Again, we pay attention. We pay attention to our inner life. We pay attention to our outer life. They're both important. We become aware. We then make a choice, because if we're off course, if we're trying to run away from ourselves, we need to choose to become more intimate with ourselves, to get to know what's going on inside of us. And when I do that, I can set my intention. And the moment I set my intention, I'm likelier, raise the odds, wiser mind, wiser action, and I can create my life from the pieces. Recognizing that some things are gone and they're not coming back, that things are changing. And so we come to that act of creation in ourselves. This is what can we be mindful of? Well, the only moment we're ever alive, some of you have heard me say that before, is now. This is it. The past is gone, the future is not here. Even if I'm working with what's happened in my past, the time that I'm working through that is now. Even if I'm planning ahead into the future, I'm still doing my planning now. So any way you look at it, you're now. And with the now, as we've seen, impermanently, thoughts and feelings just keep on popping up. They just keep coming. Because that's the nature of mind, it's the nature of our existence. And then, of course, actions. We need to be moving in the world. We need to be moving in our interior space as well. Actions of three kinds. Unhelpful, please do less of it. Neutral and helpful. This is not just theoretical. This is what we can work with. We need to recognize that we need to stop doing what's not helpful. We need to look at our thoughts and our feelings, see them as impermanent. We need to nurture and nourish more helpful or neutral responses. And we need to keep staying in the moment and not getting yanked off into old stories of the past, which we've ruminated over 400 times anyway, or fretting about the future and trying to control things we have no control about. So this virus detection system we have, mindfulness, is really looking out for these things, because there's a lot that we can trip up on during this inward journey. The power to choose. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Nazi death camps, said between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So we recognize that things are yucky, there's a space, and that space is impermanence. It's always there. from this moment to this moment, from this thought to that thought, there's always a space. And in that space, when we go back to that slide about mindful process, in that space is the capacity to become aware of what we're doing and to choose a response that's going to be more fill in the blank, wise, integrated, nourishing, mature, life-affirming, whatever. And in that response lies our growth and our freedom. And all of us, of course, want more growth and freedom. So what are the joys? What are the joys that we can come to and we can find? So we've covered the top half here. Now let's come to the joys of impermanence, having set the stage. This comes from the work of a guy by the name of Saul Levine, L-E-V-I-N-E. He's a psychiatrist in California. I came across this many years ago. And he spoke about the 4 Bs, and a 5th has been added. The reality that we are beings. And the I is for internal, and the O is outside. What am I? What does it mean to be a human? And I framed this question not as a who, because who, we get caught up in all that external identity. Who am I? We get caught in the labels of how we move in the outside world. But what am I? What does it mean to be human? The second B, which comes out of that, our understanding of what it means to be fully human, can inform our beliefs, which to live the best life, most would agree that we need to base our priorities on values. What's important to us? What's of significance? What resonates? What gets us out of bed in the morning? And then, having answered those 2 internal questions, we then ask ourselves, where do I belong? Well, we belong in the right places with the right kind of people. So if I want to be an artist, I shouldn't be going to medical school. If I want to be a chef, I probably shouldn't be in engineering school. And then once we've got these 3 sorted out to the degree possible under the circumstances you live in, how are you going to show up in the world? What is your benevolence for the world? Because all of us want to give, we want to contribute. It's in our nature. So giving in the way that I need to. No, I'm not going to be a chef. I'm going to be an artist or whatever. And then to recognize none of this is fixed either, because there's always this becoming, the active verb. And this is where flow comes in. And of course, it's not hard to imagine the next step is that when we coordinate and overlap to the greatest degree possible, our being and our doing, that's going to create a sense of harmony, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of inner alignment, a sense of purpose, joy, significance, satisfaction, significance, happiness, flourishing. What tools do we have at our disposition? Most of us, we have biology, fight or flight or freeze. We've got our emotions, which yank us all over the place, and the unpleasant ones, suffering, grief, loss, uncertainty, fear, rage, revenge, emptiness, hollowness, depression, you name it. There's no shortage of the yucky ones, the unpleasant ones. I don't call them bad. They're just unpleasant because they're signals. And then we've got all our thinking, our rationality, planning, spreadsheets, objectives, goals, strategies, tactics. But those are only the first 3 instruments in the orchestra. We've got these other ones, which actually are where the quality of life comes in. What's goodness? What are our values? What's good for me? What's good for the world? And when I say what's good for me, I don't mean in a selfish way. I mean in a way that I'm going to align with that being and who I am as a human being. Relationships, what kind of relationship do I have with myself in addition to relationships out there? So many people are into being people pleasers. They believe they have to push themselves, empty themselves. Many people don't have a good relationship with themselves. So that internal healing needs to happen as well. I use the word spirit, heart, and energy interchangeably. There's a certain kind of energy. So that word ennui, that languishing, that emptiness, that weariness, that heaviness, hollowness, has a certain energy and flavor to it. The words flourishing and satisfied and full and happy and joy, those have a different kind of energy. So we can actually mindfully pay attention to what kind of energy do we intentionally want to bring into the world, even in the presence of all the darkness and the yucky stuff. In fact, perhaps because of the darkness, we want to bring in a certain kind of energy. And then soul, I use the term in two ways. Soul is the genuine, authentic, deepest self, that who you are. The part that makes an artist say, I cannot paint or sing or write poetry. The part that says, I need to be out in the wilds counting grizzly bears in Banff National Park. That's where I belong. That's your soul speaking to you. If you wish to use it in a religious sense, and the monotheistic traditions certainly believe we are given a soul by God, you can use it in that way. It actually serves the same purpose. So all of these instruments are really important because all of these we can create from the impermanence and flux of all of this. We can create ourselves anew, and we're going to make better music if we use all the instruments. Two years ago now, about a year into COVID, I found myself experiencing lots of challenging moments. And I said to myself, what are going to be my guiding lights, as it were? And I came up with PBJ, peace, beauty, and joy. And I said, well, that's a nice idea, Alan, but how do you know when you need them? And I said to myself, well, anytime I'm at war with myself or the world or other people, that's when I need to look for peace. There's my intention and my choice. When do I need to look for beauty? When I'm feeling ugly and all I can see is ugliness in myself, my selfishness, my protection, my fight or flight or freeze. When I see ugliness in others or the ugliness in the world, I look for the beauty. And how do I know when I need to look for joy? When I'm feeling all the D words, depressed, despondent, disillusioned, empty, hollow. Now, I don't need to look very hard to experience the opposites of these. And in that moment, Alan, how can I restore the balance? So this is what I want, is PBJ. Who doesn't? How do I get there? Well, the first order of business is to slow down, because when we're in fight or flight or freeze mode, when we've got all that adrenaline going, which feeds the angst, the anxiety, the anger, the anguish, that's all adrenaline. We need to slow it down in whatever way works for you. And the moment I slow it down, I'm going to be more patient. And the moment I'm more patient, I'm going to be kinder. And Howard Thurman, who was a theologian and a preacher and a friend of Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr., said, in the stillness of the quiet, if we listen, we can hear the whispers of the heart. And once again, the heart is part of those golden instruments at the top. The ego yells, the ego shouts, feelings dominate us. Thoughts, ruminations, obsessions, ideas, ideologies, they just cloud our minds and they take over. But the heart whispers. And so we've got to slow down in order to hear it, to create things anew when things are difficult. And the joy is that impermanence is always there, that every moment is a moment to recreate. Now, PBJ aren't the only things that you can want. For some of us, some people want to practice more, and you can add the list at the end here. The list on the left is endless. Some people may want to say, I need to rest more, be more humble, or patient, or authentic, or connected, or compassionate. Make your own list of how you want to be well in the world. Go inside, find your being. There are more practices than SPK. There's creativity, there's letting go, there's acceptance, forgiveness, compassion, less judgmental. And you can add to the lists and make your own lists. And this isn't hard, because you just need to spend a moment reflecting on what moments in the day do you find yourself being ugly, you find yourself being off. What curriculum challenges have you been given for living your life? And so, as always, mindfulness is this capacity to look at ourselves, to look what's going on inside, and to say, hang on a second. Let me accept it, let me investigate it, let me see what comes up. Many people have had significant traumas in their past, and some continue to have ongoing traumas. And sometimes we can feel like the interior space is a wasteland. And as a therapist, I basically did, the work of therapy can be summed up in these 3 bullet points. And that is, what do I do now to make up for things I missed? So maybe I didn't have enough of a decent education. Maybe I wasn't loved enough. Maybe I was bullied too much. Maybe I've been too harsh on myself. Well, from this moment onwards, I can make up for that. I can't fill the gap of the past, but in this moment, I can create myself, which takes on to the second bullet point, what I give myself now and in the future for the purposes of having as few regrets as possible. There's a famous article, it's many years old now, by a palliative care nurse in Australia. And she asked people who were dying their top 5 regrets. One of them was, I didn't give myself permission to be happier. And the interesting word there is permission. Not I wasn't happier. People understand that they're not always going to be happy. Stuff comes and goes. But they didn't give themselves permission. And that comes back to that issue about relationship with self. So we can nourish our inner gardens. Where do you do all this? Well, you dance your life. And you can think of any area of your life that might be calling for your attention. Maybe it's some piece of work or study or a course you want to do. Maybe it's some part of your behavior or emotions you want to do. Maybe there's a part of you that needs a piece of healing and therapy and trauma. Maybe there's a part of you that there's certain members of the family you want to reconcile with, or you finally want to say, you know what? This relationship's done. Maybe there's parts of your physicality that you need to be attending to more. Flexibility or exercise or whatever. Maybe there's parts of your social life you want to be developing, or new circles, a new sense of belonging. Maybe there's parts of your spiritual development you'd like to look into and continue. Maybe you need to change work. Lots of people have had this beautiful invitation to look at their lives very deeply and say, you know what? Maybe there was a blessing. I'd been meaning to leave that job for a long time. Maybe there's an opportunity to do some helping out or volunteering. So we each create our yin yang, and around the time that I came up with PBJ, I thought about, what does Allan's yin yang look like? And we have that ideal circle of the yin yang, and mine kind of looks like this. it's sort of round, but it's certainly not perfect. And there are bits and pieces in there. Some are translucent and their colors, and some of them overlap and all of that. So that idea of yin yang, it's really not, it's a representation of something that doesn't exist, because those pieces are always moving and dancing, and the edges aren't perfectly smooth, and it's not symmetrical. But the fact that things are impermanent means that you can guide how the pieces are going to dance together. So how are your 5 Bs dancing? They're questions to answer about what are you? Am I aligning myself with the value-based priorities? Am I in the right places with the right people? Am I showing up in the world in all my relationships in the way that I want to? Am I showing up for myself and giving myself what I need to grow and to flourish? And again, to recognize that all of this. And this arrow here is important because each of these informs the other. If we find ourselves in the wrong place with the wrong people, for example, maybe we haven't fully figured out, where do I belong? Maybe I don't belong there. Two and a half months ago, we adopted this beautiful dog, Caramel. Some of you know the story. She was an ex-show dog. We adopted her at 6 years of age. I got her at the beginning of COVID, April 2020. And 2 months ago, one evening she started vomiting 5:30. We took her to the emergency vet, and at 8:30 that night, we came home without a dog. She had this huge tumor in her spleen, and she was gone in 2 hours. It was all over. Now, I know that many of you have had sudden tragic losses of people in your life. But in that moment of shock, and literally at 5 o'clock, she was fine. And then she was suddenly gone. And in that moment of shock, I had to do my grieving. We had to do our grieving. We had to look at it as well. And a week on either side of this, we had deaths of 2 other people who were close to us. And I don't want to disclose any more personal information than that. But in this moment of grief, I had to decide, how am I going to navigate this? Now, I could have avoided going to Fish Creek Park, and this was taken there in the winter, about 8:30 one Sunday morning. I could have avoided taking her to the off-leash area, but I didn't, because I wanted to be able to have her move with me and through me. And the first couple of times I went to the parks, I cried, I wept. And then the second and third time I went with my wife. And then I took my dog, my kid's dog, to the park. And slowly, slowly, I've sort of navigated this grief with intention to be able to come back to a point where I'm not overwhelmed and stuck and frozen by the grief. But I had to give myself time to do it, and I couldn't rush it. And we've all been through these phases. We've all been through these phases in our lives. So we've got to lean into these things. We've got to lean into these things. I only have a couple of slides left. I took this photograph on a trip to Italy, and Rome is full of churches, as everybody knows. Today is the day they buried a pope. And this was outside a church. And it's very, very interesting. And when I first saw this many years ago, I didn't really appreciate it, but the photograph struck me about the impermanence of death, and yet it seems to be enveloped by these beautiful leaves and wreaths, which are growing upward, and they look firm and they look strong. And there were 2 of them on the doors of this church, and there's an hourglass up here. And then in the Vatican Museum, they had this statue, and this is a child with an open hand, and it's holding an hourglass. And the hourglass is to remind us of time. and that time is so precious. And the quality of what we fill our time with is so important. How can we flourish internally? How can we flourish in the external world? And the joy of impermanence, that every single moment is impermanent. Every thought, every feeling, every emotion is impermanent. That it's possible in every moment to recreate ourselves. This is a beautiful painting, and the first time I saw it, I was enamored, and I went and I looked it up. So Botticelli, again, the Renaissance. And this is a pictorial, and there's so much here, and you can look it up. But here's the winter, the darkness coming out of the darkness. And this represents spring and life and all the flowers blossoming here. And this is birth. And if you look here, this is interesting because these almost look like two lungs or angel wings. And of course, this is Cupid and the arrow. And this is the fruit as we're moving from the right to the left here. And these are three graces: beauty, charm, and joy. And they're beginning to celebrate the new cycle, having come out of the coldness and the darkness of the winter, metaphorically, poetically. And we come back to life, right? And this is Venus, right? A representation. And there's certainly a suggestion here, pregnancy of new life. And then love and beauty and charm and joy. Derek Walcott won the Nobel Prize for Literature many years ago. He came from St. Lucia. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door and in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back to your heart, to yourself. Give to the stranger who's loved you all your life, whom you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror and sit. Feast on your life. I first heard this poem at a retreat, and I cried when I first heard this poem, because the realization that we have this capacity, and it's always here, to feast on my life. I don't need to wait for some other moment in the future when things will be ideal, because they'll never be ideal. And it's because of the famines, it's because of the heartache, the losses, the grief, the confusion, the anguish, the emptiness, that we want to feast again in our relationship with ourselves, so that we can then move in the world outside. These four words, core, care, charity, and cardiac, heart, they have the same root word. And then something behind these words, to care, to core, charity, caritas in Latin, heart. It's a golden instrument. These words are related etymologically as well. Heal and health, and holiday and wholeness and holy. There's a certain spirit and energy that we can do here that we want to bring back because of that impermanence. So impermanence is not emptiness, it's not nothing. In fact, it's full with potential and possibility. And so we started off with this idea that somehow when we cling or avoid, we cling to a self. We want everything to be the same. I don't like it. It's unpleasant. It's uncertain. I'm not in control. That causes suffering. But we can actually flip the picture and it becomes bigger. We see that impermanence is the doorway in the moment to creating ourselves anew. It's a doorway to flourishing because of the presence of all the yucky stuff. And this afternoon, I was having a conversation with someone and I came up with a new acronym. It just arrives. And I put it in the slide a couple of hours ago. On a whim. Not a whim as an impulse, a whim as something not thought through, but whim as in we want to live our lives with wisdom, in a healthy way, in an integrated way, and in a more mature way. Fight or flight or freeze, anger, anxiety, anguish, these aren't mature. They're real, but they're not mature, they're not helpful. So you can build your life on a whim. We need to remember that every end is a new beginning. That's why we like spring. Some people actually enjoy fall and winter. We go into hibernation, we go into reflection. And this is the nature of the world. We like to have order, green, let's go, this is wonderful. And suddenly something chaotic, red, whoa, warning, danger. And it can happen in a heartbeat. And then we can reorder and the chaos goes away and we reorder and we come to order. And notice that these things can move in any direction. This isn't a circle. They can go in any order. And to recognize that this is reality. And not all the pieces are not all the instruments are going to be well tuned at the same time. But if we're listening carefully, we'll be able to figure out which instruments actually need to be more finely tuned. And then what kind of music do we want to make? If you want to read a book, I read this one a while back, Letting Go of the Person You Used to Be. And there are lots of books out there about personal transformation and so forth. That's the end of my slides. And so just for a few moments here, before I take comments or questions, just to drop in again for a moment or two. And to go inwards and just to notice what's speaking to you. Make a mental note of it, or if you want to write it on a piece of paper, what's speaking to you about impermanence? Are there any new ideas you have about impermanence and how this might inform your life? What was your relationship to impermanence before? What was your relationship to always wanting everything in control, to be perfect, or to pretend that somehow you can bypass the yucky, unpleasant stuff? How does the idea of impermanence inform the way you look ahead to what we call the future? And of course, there are no right answers here, but each of us can work with this material wisely and mindfully to enhance the relationship we have with ourselves, our old patterns of thinking and feeling. What are those moments of suffering which are present in loss? What are those moments of suffering asking of us? It's not a difficult question, actually. We do it all the time. There are lots of unpleasant feelings, like hunger. What's it asking of me to eat? Shivering outside in a blizzard because I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt says, please get warm. So hidden in the pain, hidden in the suffering, hidden in the uncertainty is the very guide and source and energy that we need to bring. And we'll find it if we investigate it and nurture it. Thank you.
Thank you, Allan. That's a wonderful talk. We really appreciate, as a community, your gift with language and ability to bring such vivid description to your experience of your mind and your meditation practice. So it's very valuable, and thanks again for doing that. I'm sorry I missed the introduction. I think I was busy muting people and admitting, and you came in quickly. So maybe I'll do the information sharing at the end of the Q&A.
Perfect.
That was part of the introduction.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, you had said you wanted to look at the chat yourself and have a look at the questions.
Yeah. Can I give an example of how chaos goes to order? Often chaos arrives suddenly. We have the death of someone close to us. We have a sudden shutdown of COVID arrived in the end of March 2020, and all of a sudden the world as we knew it shut down. The return to order is often more difficult, and it's a bit of a longer path, because when things fall apart, we need time for reflection to understand what the pieces were, why did it fall apart, and what's needed to put it back together again. So order is related to grief, as an example, right? I'll stay with that grief. With the sudden loss that we had within a couple of weeks in our lives, I had and my family had, that the process unfolds. And how it happens is by giving it room to do that. You can't speed up grief, for example. You can't say, oh, I need to get over this. I can't say, suck it up. I can't deny my feelings. I can't deny the experience I'm having. What I can do is help the chaos come back to some order by setting some goal. So things could come back. For example, when I had this triplet of losses a couple of months back, I practiced slowing down, being patient and kind. I had to give myself room to recognize that I didn't have the emotional or cognitive energy to do the work that I usually do in the day. I had to slow down. I couldn't push anymore. So in order for me, once I know where I am chaotically and I know what some order looks like, and we can use the word order, I'll throw in some other words here: integration, coordination, fulfillment, the right kind of energy, a return to a new normal, even though I don't like the word normal. All of that goes together. And so to look at what's going on here when there's chaos, what is chaotic? What do I have control over? What don't I have control over? What is my responsibility? What is my concern? I may have concerns over which I have no control. We're all concerned about COVID and the economy. Each of us individually has more or less control over some of that than others. So the word how is interesting. I like that, because how might mean what process do we go from chaos to order? But how can also be what instruments do we use to get there? So grief is an example of chaos. The COVID shutdown. So whenever things are feeling off, unbalanced, disorganized, disintegrated, unharmonic. Is that a real word? I don't know. If people want to also a bit later on to unmute, we can certainly have live chat as well if people want to. Next question, can it be in my relationship with impermanent that it grants me lasting courage, ever changing perhaps, but lasting? If that is what you found to the question, I won't mention any names because of the recording. Yeah, absolutely, of course. So some people find that the greater the challenge, the more courage they have. The word courage, by the way, is also related to those words core and cardiac and care. It's actually the same root word. We are courageous. We're brave of heart. That is tapping into the fact that what's called for in the moment with your impermanence to the questioner, yes. And of course, it's going to be ever changing because sometimes we get exhausted. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes I can't juggle more than 2 balls at once and I end up dropping some of them. But that impermanence of dropping the balls is also an opportunity to prioritize because we're not perfect and we're not in control of all of it. And we have to nourish because we get burnt out. Can I show the slide with WHIM, WIM again? So the slide, in the interest of time, and this, I can certainly make the slides available, or it'll be on the recording. So impermanence, in fact, is an opportunity to recreate ourselves and then to flourish. That's the 3 green words, the flow. The W in WIM is wisdom. What's the wise thing to do? Simple question. And we know that. We know it's wiser to be kind than mean. H is healthy. What's healthy? Well, it's healthy to look for goodness. It's healthy to look for light. It's healthy to look for peace, beauty, and joy. It's just a better way of being and doing in the world. The I is integrated, that there's some coordination. There's some sense, the parts are moving together. So in terms of the grief example, slow, patient, and kind, SPK, is important in addition to honoring my feelings, respecting the grief process, noticing that other griefs come up that may need a little attention and processing, giving myself time off from doing the work, affirming life. So integration not only of the process, but integration of the pieces. And then M is mature. And there's a term that a theologian and a teacher uses. His name's Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. And Richard Rohr talks about mature spirituality. He talks about mature religion. So dogma, rules for the sake because somebody says so, it's not really mature. Maturity in the sense of an ownership and an authorship of what's genuine and true and authentic and what's meant by these teachings. Not just because some person who's at the top of some human institution says it should be this way. Because there's another human institution at the top of which is a person who says it should be another way. So at some point we have to go inwards and look for that wisdom, health, integration, and maturity. What's the difference between spirit and soul? Thank you for the great question. I don't define those words. I use them in the way that I did in the Golden Instruments, that spirit, heart, and energy. There's a certain spirit, right? You don't start a funeral service with a red skeleton skit. So there's a certain energy and spirit and heart that we want to bring. It's a certain kind of valence. It's a certain quality. It's a certain flavor. It's a certain tone. It's a certain kind of illumination. So those are the aspects of spirit that I'm talking about. I don't define these words because you can go and find 50 definitions. And in the end, you've got to decide what it says to you, what it resonates within you. Soul, I use in those two ways. Soul, I use it in the way that Carl Jung does. Carl Jung, the psychologist, the genuine, authentic self that says, I am a baker, I'm not a park warden. That is that innermost part of you that says, this is my calling, this is where I belong. That part of you is soul. So to the questioner here, I invite you to see what you come up with in terms of how you use those words, because any word is never final, nor is it complete. I'll say that again. There's another example of impermanence, right? No word is ever final and no word is ever complete. As T.S. Eliot said, words after speech reach into the silence. Words after speech reach into the silence. And so the words reach into us and then we work with them. Could I elaborate on how to answer what am I? What does it mean for you to be human? What is a human being? So you can think of it as the 5 aggregates. You can think of it, well, I have a body, I have sensations, the senses, I have perceptions, ideas, thoughts, feelings, emotions. I have awareness, levels of awareness come and go. I have relationships. I have all those areas of my life I dance in. So that is the what. And the reason I use the what is not who are you? Because if you go to a cocktail party and you say to somebody, who are you? They'll usually give you a list. They'll give you a name. They'll give you their occupation. Oh, where are you from? Oh, my identity. I live in such and such a suburb. Oh, which restaurant do you like? Oh, I like to eat there. It's all about that external stuff. It's not about the inner stuff. So for you, again, the same thing. What are you? And if you don't know, sit with the question. It's a really interesting question. What is it? What is a human being? And it's interesting, we're called human beings. We're not called human doings. And being as a noun and a verb. I am being right now. I am talking. I am reflecting on the questioning. You are listening. We are integrating. And when we see ourselves as verbs rather than nouns, it sort of changes things because we can see the flux, the flow, the change, the capacity to move and dance. It's not fixed and ossified. I want to comment on the thank you note I got in the question. Oh, that was a direct message. Somebody sent me a message directly. And in it, they expressed gratitude for the wisdom and support that I offered this evening. And I want to highlight that the wisdom and the support comes through us, through each of us. I might have a gift of language, but the content is this important inner stuff that we have. You can call it spirit, you can call it inner wisdom, you can call it cosmic consciousness, you can call it whatever you want. But if it landed with you, it must mean that you also have the wisdom and the capacity to support yourself. That this wisdom that's coming through here, that all of us are sharing, we've all got it. And that for me was one of those wake-up moments when I'd been exploring and practicing mindfulness, that, hey, hang on a second, this is universal. We've all got this. We just may not have been shown how to use it, but if you teach me to ride my bicycle, I'll do a good job. When I view impermanence, there's the impression that something existed in the first place. I'm upset that what I have come to an end. Can you talk about the idea of approaching impermanence from the belief that nothing exists in the beginning, that beyond what we construct, then I won't be upset when it ends? This is the greatest cosmological existential question of all. And remember, words are concepts. We're in the realms of conceptualization here. We're in the worlds of creating ideas. Nobody knows. The quantum physicists tell us, the theoretical physicists also tell us, that there was no time before the Big Bang. Can't understand this. But mathematically, a lot of this stuff's math, and I don't understand it. Now, that's an impossible concept for us to understand. How can there be no time before the Big Bang? It doesn't make sense. But in fact, what we have as our constructed self right now, that was all something else before it arose. Every molecule of oxygen that I breathe in my body has been recycled umpteen billion times on this planet. They say that every one of us breathes in a molecule that was inhaled by Jesus 2,000 years ago. Every bit of calcium in my bones came from the earth. Every iron in my red blood cells, every protein in my body, every bit of genetics, it's all recycled. And so the question, we don't really know. No one's got an absolute proven sense of what happened before I was born and what happens after we die. Everyone's got ideas, but I don't know. And for me, that makes it even more imperative that during the time when I'm born and I die in this interval called life, for me to make it as nourishingly as I can. So the way we think about ideas as well, built into this question and thinking about nothing existing, etc., etc. We have no accurate definition of nothing. It's very interesting. The quantum physicists have conversations about there's actually no such thing as nothing. We've never experienced nothing. Can you name a time when you haven't experienced something? So these words are just this huge rabbit hole of discussion and conversation. Somebody's writing here, when I face an academic challenge, my first reaction goes to the negative side with resistance. Takes me a while to think about the deeper reason attached to the challenge. It's after all my choice mostly. That's mindful practice right there. So we notice our default mode to the negative side, resistance, I can't do this, academic challenge, who am I to do this? I haven't done it before. I've got nothing new to say academically. People are going to laugh at what I have to say. All that negative judgment. And it just pops up for all of us. But then we say, hang on a second. If this academic challenge that this question is bringing up is worthwhile, it's what I want to do, it's my calling. So how do I need to be in meeting this academic challenge? I come into my own internal resources, and then there are always people in academic environments to help you. They're tutors, they're teachers, they're professors, there's mentors, there's people who's done it before, there are videos on YouTube, and all of a sudden you assemble your team and you get that courage that we spoke about earlier. Oh, I can do this. So it's that choice point, it's that space between challenge and avoidance, act resistance, and then lean into it and say, If this is important enough, I'm going to make it happen. Somebody wrote here, I've been unable to not turn to anger when dealing with difficult people. And although I feel I'm rightfully angry, I'd like to be able not to turn to anger every so often on the phone with various people I receive services from. In the moment when I lose my cool, I feel all the damage it causes me physically, mentally. I want to stop my anger, but I can't. How could I prevent raising my voice, pacing around the apartment, or any other manifestations from my anger? Beautiful question. Thank you. Some of the answer, and these are only my ideas, I'm sure there are others. You may want to jump in on this one also. Oh, there's a bunch of messages. There are numerous parts to this answer. So you know there's certain people who trigger you. You probably know what the old dance is that you do with them or they do with you. And ahead of time, you can probably predict where the conversation's going to go or how the conversation's going to go in terms of tone or defensiveness or whatever. You can choose not to engage because you know it's coming up. When it arrives, you can choose and you can practice ahead of time. You can even role play with somebody, perhaps, the conversation, so that you know that your doorbell's going to be rung, metaphorically. And you can choose in that moment, you want to go answer the doorbell, you want to pick up the phone and get into it with them. You don't need to. You can just watch your own reactivity and you can pause. You can actually say to them, or choose not to say to them, or maybe it's a relationship you need to end. Maybe you need to get those services from somebody else somewhere else. So sometimes the best thing you can do is to bail out of a certain relationship because it's not working and it's harmful. Maybe it's also harmful for the other party. So you don't necessarily have to stay and work through it all. Now, I get angry. My reactions come up, my default reactions. I get angry, I get ugly, I get anxious, I get confused, I get overwhelmed, I get exhausted, I get it all. But when it comes up, I go, this isn't permanent. That's part of mindfulness, is to recognize that impermanence. And to just sit and watch it, because within 20 seconds, something else is going to come along. So you don't have to answer the doorbell when somebody rings it. You can choose, and that's the power of the choice. So there's a number of answers there.
Allan, one of the things that has been helpful for me with anger is to
Yes,
validate it initially.
Yes.
So not discount that there may be a problem here and it's not the way I'd like things to be. Sometimes you can address that in the moment with somebody and say, you know, by saying something, often not saying anger, but I'm frustrated, and express your needs more clearly of what's needed in the moment.
Right.
Sometimes it's better if the reaction's really intense to recognize that it is and pause and, you know, in a phone call, maybe it's not so easy, but in a one-on-one, like a family relationship, you can ask for a break, take a break, and let your anger cool
Absolutely.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then seeing the softer feelings under the anger. Why am I feeling vulnerable enough to get angry? Like if you're trying to get services, you do feel vulnerable because you need something. And perhaps you're in a position of someone else having quite a lot of power as to what decisions they make on your behalf. And so acknowledging your vulnerability and giving self-compassion can be helpful.
You can, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so those are some other things. I think anger is normal. I think we have to not, in spiritual traditions, sometimes anger gets bad. Anger is bad, but anger is a normal human reaction to some level of not getting what things to be the way you want them to be. So adding on, I'm a bad person because I'm angry is not helpful.
Yeah. And in a tough moment in a conversation, you can lean into your own anger and self-respectfully and in respect for the other person say, you know what? I don't want to harm our relationship by saying something angry that I'm going to regret. I'm feeling that I'm not quite here. My emotions are taking over. And I'd like to give this a break. I know that what we're talking about is important, but right now I'm not in a position to act wisely and helpfully. So I need to take a time out. And maybe I'll come back in 2 minutes. Maybe we'll talk about this later today. Maybe I'll phone you tomorrow. But if you own all of that, you are validating those feelings, which are real. You're being respectful to yourself and the other person. You're acknowledging that this is important. And you're making that wise choice not to do further harm and escalate it. Yeah, anything else? I know I cover a lot of territory, but I do that on purpose because some things are going to land for some people, and some things are, and certain kinds of languaging or metaphors or whatever. And I want to cover a lot of territory because for each of you, the inner wisdom that you each have, the bits that you go, oh, I like that bit, I like that, or I already know that, or whatever, that's fine. Because ultimately we are on this journey ourselves, each of us, to figure out what's going on. And truly, I used to be very much trying to prop up my identity in the world and build my resume and try have everybody like me and be perfectionistic and not want to mess up and believe that I can just keep pushing myself forever and ever and not look after myself and believe that self-criticism is going to be helpful and all of that. So, no, forget all that. It took me a long time to, and it still comes up. That old Allan still comes up and I go, okay, Allan, I've got this. It's fine. The mature, healthy, integrated, wise Allan has got this. And the little immature, disintegrated, frightened, scared little kid says, oh, thank you. I'm glad you're in charge. And says, thank you for letting me off the hook. And I say, you're very welcome, little Al. You're very welcome. You can call this inner child work. You can call it whatever you want. It's looking after ourselves, nurturing ourselves, reparenting ourselves sometimes, becoming our own best friend. Oh, I knew I had another comment, Leslie, to the bit about anger. Yes, anger is very, very common and typical. And to honor any feeling that comes up, to honor any unpleasant feeling, hunger, thirst, sadness, grief, it's asking us for something. And anger itself is not a problem. It can be what we do with it because it's so impulsive that we can lash out. We get defensive. That adrenaline comes up and you get ready to fight or flight. And that's just not healthy. So you can't stop that reaction. But when you're aware of it, in that gap that Viktor Frankl talks about, whoops, here's anger. I'm about to get into a phone call with someone and I usually know how this ends. Great, change the dance, change the music. Think ahead of time. What is the old dance? Because you have a choice of getting out of it. And remember, when you change the music, the dance can't be the same. The other person can't dance the old story anymore. And they may say, oh, you're quiet this conversation. You're not arguing with me. And you go, yeah, I'm being more reflective, right? Because I don't like the way our conversations went in the past.
Thank you very much, Allan.
Yes.
We're getting close to the end of our
Announcements, Leslie.
time.
Yes, please.
I want to let people know about the upcoming talk. So on January 19th, we have Linda Carlson, Dr. Linda Carlson, speaking about life-threatening illness as a catalyst to living your best life. And then on February 2nd, we have Mary Wallace speaking about why do we meditate. These are people who've spoken with us in the past. Linda is a PhD psychologist, researcher at the the Tom Baker Cancer Institute, and she's worked a lot with mindfulness for people who have serious illness. And Mary Wallace has also worked she's a nurse, I believe, and has worked in palliative care and been a leader in palliative care. So for those of you who made it here, you obviously figured out how to get here, but if you have this is your first time here, we do encourage you to sign up on the website to receive our notices, so then you'll get reminders about upcoming talks. We are continuing to meet on Zoom for the foreseeable future. We hope to eventually return to in-person meetings, but we haven't determined the time for that. I want to express appreciation to everyone for keeping their questions in the realm of the content. And also just to mention that we do appreciate donations. You can give donations at the WTM website. All of our speakers are volunteers, but we do have costs for our technical needs, such as the website and our communication costs. Also, I just wanted to say a little bit more about Dr. Donsky. In case this is your first time meeting him, this is post-talk. In case you didn't pick up on it, he is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. He's a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Calgary and on staff at MRU as well. He's on the core committee of the Alberta Health Services Addiction and Mental Health Strategic Clinical Network. And he does public speaking and facilitating of mindfulness workshops in schools, university conferences, and the business world. And as you can tell from listening to Allan, he's widely read and very curious about a lot of things and brings all of that experience of his personal investigation to the talks he gives on mindfulness. He's also a meditator and has attended long practice periods on retreat. So he brings the experiential understanding as well as his investigation in life and in his reading. So thank you again, Allan. I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to say before we close for the evening.
I want to thank you all for your participation. Thank you for your wisdom, and there's something that calls us here from inside of us, and it is a very healing, healthy part that all of us already have. And thank you for being here and for sharing what life has to offer for all of us, for the yummy stuff and the yucky stuff, and wishing everyone a wonderful rest of the evening. And the days are getting longer. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.